It's too funny. Marshall, I
Yes, ma'am.
unplugged the coffee pot already.
Great, thank you.
And I got rid of the grounds.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So anyone who comes late, they're on their own.
Well, there's still.
There's probably plenty of that.
I don't think they ever go through more than one pot.
I don't think so either. Yes, no, yes? Are we live yet? It's mine, but I can hold it closer. We're good. As long as it's picking it up, it's fine. No, yours is fine. They're both fine. It'll work.
The other one has a hood to it that makes it a good wind, like a little.
Yeah.
But this one is,
Below zero weather.
and the wind is killing me.
Just push them together so that you and I are.
I'm settled, I can sit down.
Skirt.
I have to have my. I don't have the fancy little. What am I looking for?
This little thing? This little
Yes,
thing?
the tablet.
iPad.
Yes.
No, I saw Daisy.
I told you that Scotty was like, I saw it. Don't think I didn't see you with your little iPad walking up there to preach or whatever time it was.
Don't judge me.
It's fine. It's fine.
You are probably the most judged person in this congregation.
Brandon?
I say, anybody that's up on stage, that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anybody that's gonna get up there and say something,
I really
that not everybody agrees with.
Sunday's lesson on the
Uh-huh.
It was a good one, yeah,
Uh-huh.
I've been trying to do that.
I watched it from home, but it
Thank you.
was really good.
I will tell you,
Well, all of us detoxes.
Uh-huh.
yeah, and there was a lot more that I took out.
Oh,
I bet there was.
I'm sure.
I was trying to hone it down. So there's probably more things that could have been said.
Now, is this the Sunday that we have in our yearly meeting? Next Sunday?
First Sunday in February. So, all right.
Oh my.
Mariette is our official baker.
Uh-huh.
She will be bringing this every week.
Hey,
As
Linda.
long as
Marley.
the cranberries last.
Hey, Linda.
That was a throwaway. You may want to use that.
Are you recovered, Sarda?
Jason saying everything is going wrong.
Good.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm healthy so far.
Good.
My daughter's sick.
Oh.
What has she got, the crud?
Yeah, correct.
Danielle's been sick, or Ian's been sick with that too.
I feel like everybody's got something.
I gotta go get it. I haven't got it yet. I found some,
Kelly's late to the party.
she likes the liquid.
How's?
But I get the,
Oh wow, she sent you a long one too.
Yeah.
and they're liquid inside.
I sent the money thinking it was you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, well, that's on you, not me. All right. For those of you watching online, sorry for the late start this morning. For those of you in the room, good morning. Glad to have you. We missed many of y'all being in person last week because we had kind of some snow and ice. But Miss Rosemary was here in the room with us. So yeah, she was. But we had it. There she is.
I
Yeah.
wish there was a way to hear what she was saying.
I know.
We
didn't
try-
have, like, a
we-
mic.
Uh-huh.
We tried to repeat, but we always forget.
I know,
So
but she
yeah.
said so much.
I know. She had really
Yep.
good things to say.
So there's lots of time you're just like, wait, did the audio go out? And it's
Yeah.
weird
No,
when
I
you're
know
over
she's
there. That's,
talking.
yeah.
We need to have
Point the mic.
microphones put up
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
on the ceiling.
Jason's thought about
We'll
that.
talk to Jason about that about getting the mic. Now, sometimes you can, if you got your captions turned on,
Oh yeah.
you can read at least pretty close to the captions.
If it can pick up in these.
Well, I was using my phone.
Yeah.
I don't think I got captions on.
No, I'm saying I know on Facebook you can have the captions and
There's
well, I guess you
there's
can
a
on
little button you
YouTube
can
too.
press.
But anyway,
We'll figure it out.
that's I've done that before and gone back and looked and somebody's been talking and I can't hear what they're saying, but I can read the captions and it's pretty close.
I just
So-
thought maybe you could have
like a mic
Yeah.
Yeah.
hanging in the middle of the room.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
Daisy
it would-
can like grab it and just
It would,
kinda
well,
talk
not
into it.
necessarily have to grab it, but I think it would pick it up.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
if,
that
I
it
think
would.
if we just had anytime somebody has a question, if they just walk up here and we point the microphone.
That would cut down on your
No.
questions.
Yeah.
Wenda's gonna
No
sit
questions at
there like
all.
this the whole time.
No.
She's not gonna do it.
That's for other people.
That's right. So anyway, man, it's been a morning.
Did you talk about your?
I have not, but
Not
a
yet.
lot of people got a text from me this morning, saying that I needed some assistance.
And I contributed.
Did you? Well, good. I'm glad you did that.
Oh man.
I don't. I didn't get hacked. We're thinking that either maybe our church directory or one church or something like that got hacked, because people are getting a text from me asking for help to buy like a gift card or something for somebody else, but it's signed
Which you would never
Mar-
do that.
which I would
You
never
would
do
never
that.
text any of us. So-
and it's signed Marshall Brown, lead minister, which I never sign it. Like I would never do that. You know. So yeah, the whole text does not sound like me at all. Anyway, so my phone was blowing up this morning with people telling me, "Hey, I got this thing." I'm like, "Okay, we're working on it." And then Lori was kind enough to send out a
Woohoo!
church email and post in Flagstone Friends and Family. Don't, like if you get something like this, it's a scam. Don't do anything. But I just now got another text from somebody going, "Hey, I think you got hacked." So I think I'll be getting those messages
For a long time.
all day today.
That's why I got off Facebook.
Yeah.
It'll be for a long time.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So I really don't know exactly where it came from. It's more of a nuisance than anything else, and just
For real.
You know, anyway, so if you got a message like that from me, I appreciate your willingness to be generous, but it's not from me. So anyway, we're
Oh.
dealing with that this morning, and then we thankfully Brandon got everything running because we couldn't get our AV stuff working this morning, but we did just now.
Been a
And
weird morning.
before I got to print off my notes for class today, this sounds like I'm griping. I don't mean it's a gripe at all. It's just the way it
It's
is.
factual.
He's got a retreat coming up this weekend, so he's printing off booklets for the kids. 39 of them, I think.
39 bucks.
And-
It's still going, and you know it will print it and fold it for you.
Oh, I try and do all of those things and it messes it up every time. So
The point is, this is
Yeah,
why
we'll talk
I
to you about
have
it.
my laptop here, because I didn't print off my notes before he started on that.
you guys,
And it's still printing. So,
what a morning.
what a morning.
Hey,
Glad
you
you
got-
guys are here.
You got this.
I,
we're good
yeah,
to go.
I got
a
my
baby
ice.
in the room.
I got people who are kind enough to be worried about me and wondering what kind of text I'm sending out. So there's good to be seen.
Do you
in
need
it.
money, Marshall? Do you
Someone needs an Apple Card.
The
So-
fact that it said blessings.
yeah.
That's not Marshall.
That ain't me. I don't want you to be blessed. Why would I say that? Yeah.
He texted
Yeah, that's
and
right.
it said, "I need your assistance." I was like, "Marshall, no, he doesn't need my
I
assistance."
wouldn't even use that
What
word.
is that?
Need your
I got a
assistance.
message from a friend today. It says, preachers, the reason so many preachers are leaving, it isn't because they're losing their faith. It isn't because of the church. It's because they're not getting paid enough.
He needs an Apple gift card.
Yeah,
whatever
I
that
need an
is.
Apple gift
Give
card.
this guy an Apple gift card.
That's right. That's right. Preachers aren't getting paid enough. So yeah.
Don't up your contribution. Just send this man a gift card.
Yeah. I know someone who needs one. All right. Anyway, we're in Revelation chapter 14.
Went on without me.
We got it. We did. We got in here
Sorry.
a couple weeks ago, and got into the first few verses. And last week, we got through talking about this 144,000 that we're seeing again, and seeing them with the Lamb, and all the different character traits of those folks. I don't know. Is there anything that we didn't say last week that you want to make sure to say?
Well, the past 2 weeks that we've been in here have been weird because I think weather and sickness has affected all of us. So we only had, it was a blessing in disguise, right? We only had a couple of us in here talking about the Mark of the Beast. So we were just able to fly
That's
through
right.
that.
That's
And then Rosemary and Marshall and I had some great discussions on the first verses of chapter 14. So we're just trucking right along.
That's
We're
right.
making it on.
So yeah, we got through the first, I don't know, paragraph or so there talking about
I'm trying.
these
I have a
144,000.
question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We're not taking questions right now. Sorry.
But
Into the mic.
Yeah.
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 Sorry.
When you refer to back in the Old Testament, when
Yes.
you say, well, it's not new, they've heard this before, okay.
Yes.
The people who are reading this back when John wrote it,
Mm-hmm.
are they scholars? Or are they average people?
Mm-hmm.
How do they know?
That
Because
happens.
there's not
Yeah.
a Bible
Right.
printed up and everybody has one
Yeah.
on their coffee table.
Mm-hmm.
How do they handle
It's
it?
a good question. So the question being, for those of you watching online, if when we make references to, hey, this is something that was also talked about in the Old Testament, the same imagery as one of the prophecies of the Old Testament, how would the people in John's day, did they have an awareness of those things? How would they know that? So honestly, it's kind of both. There would be, especially if these churches that he's writing to, that we looked at back in the beginning, the 7 churches that this was originally written to, are in Ephesus and the surrounding cities on the western side of modern day Turkey. Okay, so at this point, the church would be, depending on when John wrote this, anywhere from 30 some odd to maybe even closer to 60 years old. So several decades in.
Still babies though.
Still pretty young,
Yeah.
but it's been around for a little while. It's not completely brand new. But you've got this mixture, and especially in a city as big as Ephesus and the surrounding communities, you've got a mixture of Christians who were raised in a Jewish background, and then Gentiles who wouldn't have, to your point, wouldn't have had these Old Testament scriptures. So, John was raised Jewish. A lot of the people that he's writing to are Jewish, but not all of them. But in these churches, what we have an understanding of is that they still used a lot of Old Testament scriptures, even in the New Testament church. For example, they sang praises together. Where'd they come up with the songs? Well, a lot of them are psalms. They went back to David's psalms and things like that, and used those in the church, worship experiences, because that's what they had. Did they write more songs besides that? Sure, but that's where they started. You know what I'm saying? So John and Paul, these different people would go back and pull Old Testament scriptures, especially for a Jewish audience, and say all these prophecies and all these things that you've heard about since you were kids going to church about the Messiah, that's Jesus, and here's how we're supposed to live because the Messiah has come. Does that make sense? Now, would they probably have to do some extra explaining to those from a Gentile background? I would think so. If you read I'm making this a really long answer, Linda, I apologize, but if you read like the Gospel of Mark, the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all 4 inspired by God, but all 4 written from kind of different perspectives, right? Mark, compared to the other guys, does a lot of explaining of Jewish customs as he's telling the story of Jesus. So he says, the Pharisees got mad in Mark chapter 7 because the disciples weren't washing their hands right. And then Mark, that story is also in Matthew, I think. But Mark is like, okay, here's the thing. When Jews go to the marketplace, they have to wash, and he goes into a whole explanation of hand washing. Well, the Jewish Christians wouldn't need that explanation, but the Gentile Christians would. So I'm saying as these churches are getting this message from John about this revelation that he is seeing, the Jewish Christians are going to be like, oh, that's similar to Isaiah or Daniel or these different prophets. They're going to recognize that.
And they say that to the.
Probably so. They'll probably, yeah. And if there are Gentiles in the audience are like, man, this is weird stuff, they can explain it to them. Hey, actually, Daniel saw that a few hundred years ago, and here's what that means. Does that make sense?
Isn't it kind of like on Sunday mornings when you will say, turn to Mark, and Mark is in the New Testament, and it's the second book of the New Testament?
Yeah.
Just kind of letting, so people that are not familiar with the
Yep.
Bible know where to go.
Yep. I've tried really hard for the last several years to just assume, I've noticed now because I'm more conscious of it. Even when I don't know, somebody gets up and makes communion thoughts, and they're like, we all know that David blah 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 blah, or something like that. I'm like, no, we all don't. A lot of us do, but not everybody here does. And so, yeah, I want to try to make sure, and Brandon does this too, that when we're explaining, that's why y'all get sick of me saying, this was originally written in ancient Greek. Y'all that are there every Sunday, you know that now, right? But I'm assuming there's somebody that doesn't, either sitting in the crowd with us right there or watching online that's like, oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Just to have a little bit more of an explanation. So, yeah, it was the same thing back then, too. There would be a portion of the people who are hearing these words of John and going, oh, that matches some of the prophecies from before. I recall, I see the connection there. And then there would be other people who are like, okay, you're going to have to explain it to me. Kind of like we are now. Yes, ma'am.
The early believers, of course, were mostly Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
and they had gone to other cities, like we talked about. And I know that it was very common within the synagogue setting that they had scrolls
Mm-hmm.
of everything that had been written down, and that was their teaching. That's how Jesus got up and read out of the scroll.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a solid background in the scriptures.
Yes.
And then as they dispersed, I have a hunch that they took scrolls with them.
Right.
And then, of course, shared that with the Gentiles.
Yeah, so Rosemary's making the point that people back in Jesus' day, they had, especially in the synagogues and stuff, and almost all the major cities of the Roman Empire had at least one synagogue, a Jewish place of worship where they would have scrolls, they would have copies of the Old Testament. I'll take that a step further, and you guys have heard, maybe you've heard me talk about this before, but in the Jewish culture of Jesus' day, every kid, male and female, boys and girls, by the time they were 5 or 6 years old, would have at least not just had exposure to the first 5 books of the Old Testament, sorry, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, but they would have memorized it.
Word for word.
Like by the time they were, getting into what we would call elementary school, all of them would have had at least the first 5 books memorized. Now, those that were a little bit, I guess, sharper, or that it was assumed, hey, these, not the girls at all, but these boys could potentially become rabbis.
For sure not the
I know.
girls.
I
For
know.
sure not.
It's not fair, but it's the way it was. Would go on, and then they would memorize like the rest of the Old Testament. So you would have a lot of these, not even necessarily rabbis, but still there's a lot of the Jewish, at least the Jewish males, would have had, probably close to the whole Old Testament memorized at some point, or definite, like it's ingrained into them. They've heard these stories before. They've heard these prophecies before multiple times. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the women, the females,
Mm-hmm.
did they, when this in the New Testament, when this started with
Mhm.
John and they were accepting Gentiles and all
Yes.
that, were they including the women then?
Mhm.
And weren't the women totally uneducated?
They were definitely more uneducated than the males
So they
were.
wouldn't-
The Chosen actually.
So
if you guys have-
they're real quick answer, and
No,
then
no, no,
please
no,
go with
no,
yours.
go for it.
The women were still allowed to come to the synagogue and worship. Just the intensive, like, let's get in here and memorize all this, and let's get questions answered and all that kind of stuff. That would be more the males than the females. But the females would still come to the synagogue, or they would still come to the temple or whatever. Go ahead.
If you guys have seen The Chosen, which obviously there's a difference between here's the gospel, the written word of God, and then hey, here's a TV show about Hollywood about it and stuff too. I thought that they did a good job. If you've seen it, you can tell that Matthew, Mark, and John and these guys that are following Jesus, that they have an awareness of the scriptures and stuff too, and they take Mary Magdalene in the show. They take Mary Magdalene in, and one other lady, and Matthew is just kind of teaching them about this stuff, like they're memorizing and writing down scriptures and those kinds of things. I imagine that was probably what happened.
But it was
Maybe not formally.
revolutionary, honestly, and we talked about this when we had our insights class, when we were talking about some of the women's role stuff. It was, well, and even the Let's Eat series, when we were talking about the different meals that Jesus ate. When we see in Luke chapter 10 that Jesus is in this home and he's teaching, and Martha, is running around getting all the housework done and trying to get the food for everybody, and Mary is where? Sitting at his feet listening. That was not only was that not common, that was looked down on.
She's
So,
supposed to be doing
if
what?
a rabbi comes
Yeah.
into your home and he's going to do some teaching, it was the men that would gather around, and the women were in charge of taking care of the house. The fact that, but this is part of the it's a subtle thing that we don't notice, but that's a revolutionary thing that Jesus incorporated into his ministry. That his gospel was for everybody, and it doesn't matter what the social norms are, and it doesn't matter what's accepted or unaccepted. Anybody who wants to hear the truth, you're welcome to come hear the truth. So the fact that Mary is there and Jesus as a rabbi is not saying, hey woman, this is not your place. But she's there. As a matter of fact, Martha even comes over, and when she gripes about, Mary needs to help me, it's not just about I'm doing this all by myself. There's part of Martha that's going, that's not her role.
She's not supposed to be there.
She's sinning right now. And I don't want her to be in trouble. Plus, I want help. so it's it's probably both. But there's part of her that's going she's not supposed to be there, and Jesus is going, hey, this is not something that we're worried about. If she wants to learn, she can learn. Matter of fact, you should probably be sitting here beside her, Martha. Revolutionary concept in the culture of the day. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to the original thought about the word being spread,
Mhm.
Paul in nearly all of his letters asked them to pass this letter on to so-and-so, when you're finished reading it, pass it on to the church and wherever. And so that's another way that
Right.
they heard all this.
For sure. That was the whole thing of why we have.
My bad.
It's all right. Just make sure you're okay. Why we have these letters written down in the first place. They had the Old Testament, and then they had, the apostles and different teachers, Apollos and different people going around and going, hey, all the stuff that we knew about the Old Testament has been fulfilled in this guy Jesus, and let's talk about him. And then they would share these letters, with other people. So it took a while for us to get the Bible that we got, for sure. Good questions. Anybody else?
Well, there was I'm not sure what book it's in the New Testament about Priscilla and
This is the book of Acts.
Aquila teaching Apollos
Mhm.
a more in-depth way
Right.
too. So she knew
Yep.
from
Not only did she know, it specifically says she was one of the teachers.
Teacher,
Like she
yeah.
actually, did some of the instruction.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so she had knowledge, which probably was pretty rare for the woman
Right.
to have.
And if you go through the book of Acts and you see every single time, because we see more of Paul traveling around to different churches than anybody else, every town that Paul went to, the first place that he went when he got into that town was where? The synagogue. Okay? He goes to the Jewish audience first. Why? Because they're the ones that were waiting for a Messiah. And so, and they would have these prophecies. They would know all these things. So he would walk into the synagogue and go, hey, guess what? All these prophecies, read through all the scrolls you want to. It all points to Jesus. Let me explain that to you. And that's where initially the church in each one of the towns that Paul went to, where there wasn't a church already, started in the synagogue. Now, eventually there would be guys who were like, we don't like what you're saying, and he would have to go next door and allow literally go next door and allow Gentiles to come in too. So we always look at Paul and he's called the apostle to the Gentiles, but his first stop every time was to the Jews first, because they had this background, they had this awareness of these Old Testament scriptures, but then we got to incorporate the Gentiles in too. So okay, let's get into Revelation chapter 6.
14.
Sorry, I looked at verse 6. Revelation 14, man, this day cannot end sooner
great.
for me.
You're
I'm
doing
just ready
great.
to-
I like was like,
Well,
did I
we
have
could
a
ask
dream?
for it.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah,
We have not made it very
Sorry.
far.
Rev- All the way back to chapter 6. We got a lot to redo. Okay, chapter 14. I'm going to start in verse 6 and go through verse 13. We started talking about these three angels last week. Matter of fact, I think we talked about the first one. So we got two more to go. Okay. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." And the second angel followed and said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries." A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. He will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. And there is no day or night for those who worship the beast and his image, or for anyone who receives the mark of his name." This calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints who obey God's commandments and remain faithful to Jesus. And then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Right, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes," says the Spirit, "they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them." And we'll just kind of pause. An NIV, 1984 NIV.
It just was so different that was like,
Oh, sorry.
maybe you had something totally different.
No. Okay, so we started talking, and we talked quite a bit last week about the first angel. This flying in midair. He has the eternal gospel, and that's what we spent a lot of time talking about last week. Just the message of Jesus, the salvation that can come through Jesus, and that it's kind of this message of hope still, that even and it's proclaimed to every nation, tribe, and people. I think I left one out. I think there's 4 things. Anyway,
Yep.
yeah, every tribe, people, language, and nation, which is the same group of people in chapter 13 that end up following the beast or giving their allegiance to the beast. And so this angel is proclaiming the good news of Jesus to the same group of people. So there's still, and what we talked about last week, is there's still this glimmer, at least, of hope, even for those who have rebelled against God and who are giving their hearts to the beast. There's still an opportunity for repentance and for life change, before final destruction takes place.
Yeah, it's at least, I mean, I hope that all of us in these past 14 chapters have all seen that, although yes, there's lots of scary stuff that it at least seems scary. If anything, I mean, we've called this series blessed because we're blessed whenever we read this, but it seems like all of these scary parts are always at least counteracted, or there's hope and stuff too. So here are the people in chapter 13 that Marshall was mentioning that have given themselves fully to the beast, or these beasts, the dragon, have given themselves fully. I mean, think about the people in our own personal lives that we know are the farthest away from Jesus that we can possibly think of. And where we might give up and say, man, there's no way that I could possibly reach them. There's no way that Jesus, I mean, we could think in our head, there's no way that Jesus could crack that shell because they're so hard. Their heart is so hard. Here the angel is like, man, even to those people, I am still continually pursuing and ready for them to give their allegiance to the Almighty God. And that's encouraging to me, at least about that part.
For sure.
Yeah,
Rosemary?
it's amazing that, God has given us the mandate to go out and proclaim the gospel. And when it was down to the end of the wire, he sent an angel to profess the gospel, the eternal gospel. And then he calls out, fear God and give him glory.
Right.
So there's a place here in God in his mercy and his love is calling forth people to receive me, give me glory, know who I am, fear me because you know, what the judgment is coming.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it's a final message, and it still even harkens back. I mean, saying fear God. I mean, that's from the Old Testament, and it's not a live in terror of God. It is a holy fear. It's a reverence and an awe, and that's what God's people are called to: fear God and keep His commandments. That's what Solomon says at the end of Ecclesiastes. This is what the NIV translation says. This is the whole of man. WHOLE. This is what completes man. Fearing God, not I'm scared to death of God, but just like I recognize God is amazing and God is awesome and God is powerful, and keep His commandments. So here at the end, with one last glimmer of hope, here's this angel going, fear God. Like, that's been the message the whole time. That hasn't changed. Even if we say, the gospel is different than the Old Testament. Okay, there's some differences for sure, but the overall theme has been the same from the garden. Fear God, honor God, do what God asks you to do, because you'll be blessed if you do. Good things happen if you do. Okay, let's look at the second angel here. This is where we left off. Fallen is Babylon. Fallen is Babylon the Great, who made all nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. So the question becomes: all right, wait. Why are we talking about Babylon? Like, where did that come from? We haven't seen Babylon yet in Revelation.
I don't think so.
There's been another reference to Sodom and Gomorrah back in chapter 11 with the two witnesses that came. But we haven't heard of Babylon yet. And just spoiler alert, this isn't the last time we're going to hear the name Babylon. I believe it's chapter 17.
It's all about Babylon.
That's when Babylon shows up again. So here's this angel flying around going, fallen is Babylon the Great. Okay. What does that mean? What does that mean, Brandon?
No, I'm going to ask Linda. Linda, what do you think?
Confused.
Yeah, there we go.
Help.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be, I don't know if this is where you're going to go. I think we make,
We haven't talked ahead of time,
Yeah.
just so everybody knows.
this is well, it's not a small subject in the Old Testament, is this theme of Babylon. But like Marshall said, in chapter 17, it's like we're going to take Babylon like a frog in our science classes, and we're going to, cut it open and examine all the
Dissect.
little bitty parts of it and everything like that. So I wonder if right now it's like, well, back in the Old Testament,
Yeah.
Babylon was seen as this and was known as this great, destructive, evil power, because they were. They were a terrifying people group. They came and they took over a lot of the Holy Lands, and just basically the entirety of the land at that point. They just come in and decimate people, and they were not very kind. I don't know if you can remember some of our Old Testament prophet discussions. These are the guys that are beheading soldiers and making giant piles of body parts like hands and heads and all kinds of
The
things.
Assyrians were worse than them, but the Babylonians were bad, for
Yeah.
sure.
And so they are not great people. And in the Old Testament, God continually showcases how bad these guys are, but the fact that He's going to use them to conquer Israel and Judah, and He's even going to use the bad guys to do something like that. And so they, in the Old Testament, are these bad guys, but they also kind of become like this archetypical bad guys, like that represent evil as a whole too. It'd be like us talking about I'm not sure. Like in World War II, especially in those moments, you could say, well, Germany is the enemy, and it wouldn't just be Germany and Japan are the enemy. It's like they are evil. Anybody that's Japanese is evil. Anybody that's German is evil. And we can look at that now and be like, well, okay, this is in the past, and many of those people aren't even alive anymore. But you could take something from the past like that and be like, okay, this is the epitome of evil. And that's kind of what John is doing here, and he's going to develop this thought later of saying, here is the epitome of evil. And the angel says this, fallen is Babylon the Great. So here's this epitome of evil that is fallen and is no longer.
And to take that just a little bit further, I want to get your question in just a second. So the Babylonian Empire under under Nebuchadnezzar is the empire that God used to destroy the city of Jerusalem and carry his people off to captivity for 70 years. Okay? So it's not just that they are evil and they're bad. That's exactly true. But they also annihilated God's people. There was destruction that took place specifically of God's city and God's temple. The temple was destroyed. The city of Jerusalem was torn down. Just like the representation of the presence of God seemed to be destroyed by the Babylonians. Okay? And then, 70 years later, another empire comes and takes over the Babylonian Empire. That's the Persian Empire. And God's people are allowed to go back and rebuild Jerusalem, and we go from there. But to Brandon's point, throughout the prophets, like hundreds of years before Babylon came, Isaiah, 200 years, 150 to 200 years before Babylon came and destroyed Jerusalem, told people Babylon's coming to destroy Jerusalem. Like it was on the horizon. It was already God's plan. So yeah, now you got this angel flying around, and he's talking about Babylon the Great, and it was a great empire. It was an amazing empire. Matter of fact, Nebuchadnezzar himself in Daniel chapter 4 and verse 30 calls it this great empire. What has been greater than Babylon is kind of the words that he uses. Okay, so there was this concept that even though the Babylonian Empire had gone away, it still represented greatness and power in opposition to God's people and God's presence. Does that make sense? What were you going to ask?
It says she.
Mhm.
Is that
Mhm.
she meaning Babylon or she as female?
Yes.
It's like us talking about the church. The church is a her. Like we are the bride of Christ or
Well,
something.
or anything.
right?
I
We're
mean,
not
like
bashing
the.
females again.
No.
I mean-
no. I mean, the Titanic sank. What did they say? She sank. She hit an iceberg. She sank. So there's cities would be referred to sometimes with a. I mean, Jerusalem was referred to that way
Yeah.
too in Scripture as a she. So
I don't
that's
know why
not
it
uncommon.
helps. At least
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But yes, ma'am.
To part of this picture, not only were they a war machine, but they also managed commercial money,
Mm-hmm.
the whole commerce system.
Mhm.
So when we get further on in Revelation, we see where God has brought judgment on that whole system. And
Mhm.
I would, for another word for it, I would call it humanism,
mm,
which man, apart from God, established himself
Mm-hmm.
as the ultimate in control, and
Right.
that's what Nebuchadnezzar did. What I like the way the ending of that story
Uh-huh.
is that big rock came and just
Yeah,
smacked
it
all
wasn't evil. It wasn't just evil and destruction. It was wealth and
Yeah,
and
very
it was the whole
selfishness and stuff
The
too.
whole thing.
I just realized I'm looking back there and the camera froze up again. So if you're watching online, I
Yeah,
hope
no,
you
it's
can
okay.
still hear us.
It looks like they can.
Even though you can't see us moving. I know. It looks like I'm getting ready to punch you or something.
Ah,
Anyway, I wanted to show you a couple of things. If you go to, let me look at our clock. I'll do this quickly. Isaiah, go back in your Old Testament to the book of Isaiah, chapter 21, and verse 9. You got a footnote for it?
I already went back and looked at it.
Okay.
Aha.
Yeah.
I did have that.
Yeah, a footnote for it? Okay.
21.
21:9. Isaiah 21, verse 9. It's a prophecy. This whole prophecy is against Babylon. It says, look, here comes a man in a chariot with a team of horses, and he gives back the answer, Babylon has fallen. All the images of its gods lie shattered on the ground.
sounds
Okay?
pretty close.
So yeah, so about, 700 years before John has this revelation, 700 or 800 years beforehand, here's this prophecy from Isaiah about Babylon, which in Isaiah's time hadn't even happened yet. Okay, Jeremiah, this is even more interesting to me. Jeremiah chapter 51. So almost the end of Jeremiah. Chapter 51. Now, real quick before we read, we're going to read verses 7 and 8. But Jeremiah actually lived when Babylon came and destroyed everything. He survived, but he witnessed the destruction, and then he had to go into exile himself afterwards. Okay, so probably when he's writing at this point, not everything in Jeremiah is chronological, but a lot of it is. So at this point, the destruction has already taken place. He's already witnessed it.
So
All
it's
right.
not false.
So you can imagine how. I mean, that's why Jeremiah wrote the book of Lamentations. He was lamenting of what had happened to God's people and to God's city. But here in chapter 51, look at verses 7 and 8. Babylon was a gold cup in the Lord's hand. She made the whole earth drunk. The nations drank her wine before they have now gone mad. Babylon will suddenly fall and be broken. Wail over her. Get a balm for her pain. Perhaps she can be healed. So he talks about Babylon falling and being broken, but what else does he say? That Babylon did what?
Oh,
Made the nations do what?
oh, get drunk.
Made the nations drink. Okay, so go back to Revelation chapter 14. Fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. So, again, using familiar imagery. Okay, there's a connection here between the Old Testament Babylon and whatever it is that this angel is talking about now. So that's the next question: is like, what? Who or what is Babylon the Great? What are we talking about here, Brandon? I got a whole list of theories.
I know. I'll just say that it represents any kind of the humanism, any kind of power or humans as a whole that are evil and entice others into their evil.
Mm-hmm.
Boom.
So here's the different theories. If you want to write these down, feel free. If whatever. But one theory is that is talking about the city of Rome, or basically the Roman Empire, but the city of Rome, because Babylon seems to be used at least one other place in the New Testament as a euphemism for Rome. For example, at the end of 1 Peter, 1 Peter talks about she who is in Babylon greets you, and so people think that because he was
Being
probably in
facetious.
Rome. Mm-hmm. And then also there's similarities between the power of Rome and emperors getting drunk on their own power and forcing nations into the Roman lifestyle that it represents the Roman Empire. And then, of course, if we're assuming a later date of Revelation, then the persecution that has been taking place and will continue to take place seems to fit as well. Some people think that Babylon is a representation of the church, but specifically, any part of the church that has walked away from the New Testament and kind of become its own thing. For example, some people look at this as the Roman Catholic Church and saying, they have false teachings, it's had power, it's created all these problems. Or maybe just, some church now or in the future that is, supposedly of God, but is actually, I guess, functioning on behalf of the beast, like leading people away from God through their own power and influence. Yeah. There's some people that think it's just human beings in general, that mankind has continued to commit adultery against God since the very beginning, and so this is just talking about how mankind is separate from God, has fallen, and will be destroyed. There are some who have more of a futurist viewpoint of Revelation, like everything in Revelation is still going to happen, hasn't happened yet, it's going to happen in the future. And they think that this is talking about the actual city of Babylon, which is in modern day Iraq, that will rise to power before Christ comes again. And so there were some people that got really scared, not too long ago when we had all the Iraq War and Hussein and all that kind of stuff. Like, oh, here is the city of Babylon that's on the rise, and that didn't come to fruition, at least not yet. And then there are those who think that this reference to Babylon the Great is actually talking about Israel, or more specifically the Jewish people of John's day, especially if you look at if you assume an early date of Revelation, where the persecution of the church at that time is being carried out mostly by Jewish people. And if you're thinking about a lot of these different events pointing to the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of Judaism, we've talked about that a couple of times in this class, so I won't rehash that right now just for time's sake. So that Babylon is actually talking about the Jewish people in Judaism, because Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18 is referred to more. I mean, it mentions the wine of her adulteries here, but she's described more specifically as a prostitute. We'll find that out here in a couple of chapters.
Lots of fun.
Yeah, and the only nation, if you go back to the Old Testament, the only nation that God ever referred to as a prostitute in the Old Testament was his own people, Israel. He would refer to other nations sometimes by different things, but when he talked about adultery and prostitution, almost every time he's talking about Israel, because Israel, he felt like, was being adulterous to him. And so that's the kind of imagery. So the prostitute in Revelation 17 it actually talks about that prostitute being drunk on the blood of God's holy people who testified about Jesus. And we also know that, Jewish leaders collaborated with Gentile leaders to, have Jesus killed, and then after that to persecute the church too. So the two arguments that make the most sense to me are either that we're talking about the Roman Empire or we're talking about the Jewish folks, one or the other. Okay, and I'm saying all that like I went through that whole discussion. It may become a little more clear when we get to chapter 17, and there's more specific details about this prostitute Babylon at that time. What we know for sure right here is that this angel's flying around, and basically, if nothing else, is proclaiming this entity or group of people, whoever it is, that has been in rebellion against God and has caused other people to be rebellious against God, is going to be destroyed. And we as Christians can hold on to that hope that even when there's people in our lives or our culture or our nation or nations around us that are being rebellious against God, there's still hope for us that those folks are going to come to their end. We're going to end up being blessed. Is that fair to say?
I think so.
Okay. Go ahead.
My brain is caught up on the golden cup being in the Lord's right hand.
Mm-hmm.
So
we haven't got to that yet.
Okay.
No, let's read about that because we got time. Third angel. If we can go, is everybody good going on to the third angel?
that was in the
Well, she's talking about the Jeremiah
Oh, I'm
verse.
sorry.
yeah.
Oh, in Jeremiah.
Yeah, at the beginning of 7.
Mhm.
So I think it plays on with, I don't know, definitely important to
The-
God at some point to be in the right hand of God, but if it's more on, if I'm missing that.
The cup of destruction.
Well, no,
I'm sorry.
says,
I have to go back to Jeremiah.
That it's in God's
51:7,
hand.
Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
So,
So the question being, if Babylon is a golden cup of destruction, why is it in the Lord's hand? And the simple reason is, God is, and he spoke about this through the prophets, God is allowing Babylon to be used to punish his people. Babylon is going to destroy Jerusalem and going to take the Jewish, or I guess the people of Judah, away to captivity. Why? Because God has been begging for hundreds of years for them to be faithful to him. And for hundreds of years, they've refused over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And God is going, your time's running out. I'm not going to be this jilted husband much longer. I'm not going to let you guys keep making these decisions over and over again. There's going to be consequences to your actions. What's the consequence? You're going to be destroyed. And by God allowing Babylon to destroy his people, it is the same as God doing that himself in the Jewish mindset. Because and that's hard for us. That's hard for us sometimes when we think about the grace of God and how compassionate he is. And it's hard for us sometimes to wrap our minds around God using destructive things to discipline. But it doesn't, to me, it doesn't eliminate his grace. I mean, if you read through the Old Testament, I'll put it to you this way. How many chances do you give your kids to mess up before you discipline them? You know? But eventually it's like, okay, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. Does that make you a non-loving parent? No, you're trying to help your kids become functional adults, right? So there's got to be consequences. It's the same thing. God is disciplining his children, his people. Did he give them a whole bunch of chances to do the right thing? Begged them to. Please stop doing what you're doing. Please come back to me. Let's have the relationship we used to have. And they refused over and over and over again. And so eventually, God's just like, okay, you don't want this relationship with me, so I'm going to sever it. And I'm going to allow you to suffer the consequences of not being in a relationship with me anymore. Does that make sense?
And think what's more loving? A parent that says out of love, well, I hate this, but I'll just let you keep doing it. Imagine if God didn't discipline Israel. Where would they be? They would just be farther along down the path of destruction. Mm-hmm. And so it looks at as scary for God to pour out a cup of wrath with Babylon and the Assyrians and stuff. But it's loving at the same time, because isn't it more loving to do something about those kinds of things, to discipline your children, than it is to allow them to continue down a path?
Yeah.
And it's hard for us because whenever God does that to us, we're like, oh, you are so unfair right now.
Yeah.
And what
God
have
is
I
so
done?
mean.
Yeah, I remember the times that God's allowed really negative things to happen to me in my life, and you sit and wonder, but then you look back. I'm sure all of us have a story. You look back and realize, man, if that wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't have these perspectives or these kinds of things now. Mm-hmm. And so even, I've heard it before, even God's discipline is loving and graceful, but we just have a hard time with discipline.
Well, and he even says that the Lord disciplines those that he loves. Like, if I'm not being disciplined, then I'm not being loved. You know? Yes, ma'am.
And I get another picture out of this too. If God, in his mercy and grace, takes care of and protects his people, they chose not to receive that care and protection by their choices. Mm-hmm. So he backed up.
Right.
And and the consequences of him backing up is that all of the pervasive evil of the satanic kingdom, the world kingdom, hit them.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And they could feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They suffer the consequences of their own choices. Yep. Now, the reason that I was confused about your question is because of what the third angel says. Because
we can finish this.
We're gonna find another cup here. Okay. Go back and look again at what the third angel in verse 9 said in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast in his image and receives a mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. He'll be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. The smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. There is no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast in his image, or for anyone who receives the mark of his name. Yikes. Okay, so bad stuff is going to happen, all right?
Let's
Go ahead.
Let's remember really quick at the very first part of chapter 14. I know only about half of us were here for that. There's two different peoples. There's the people that are marked and sealed
For the beast.
For the beast,
Uh-huh.
and then there are people that are marked and sealed with the Holy Spirit in them that are following Christ Jesus. Those are two
Lamb.
different people.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody on the fence because Satan owns the fence. It's either you are a part of God's kingdom and you are with him, or you have the mark of the beast and you are with that. At the beginning part of chapter 14, we see what happens to the people that are a part of God's kingdom. They get to be with the Lamb and they get to witness this amazing stuff. None of these bad things are happening to them. They're singing this new song. And so the second half of chapter 14 is all about the people that have the mark of the beast on them. Mm-hmm. And so you've got the amazing blessing and the future hope that we all have for following Jesus. And then we also see it's blessing and curses. Here's the second part too. Now here's what happens whenever you follow the mark of the beast, or whenever you are not protected by the Holy Spirit at the same time too.
Yeah, exactly.
It'd be nice if there really were a mark of the beast, because then you could tell.
Then you would know. Then you would know.
Satan's more tactful than that.
Is the one, that's a question I had too, the hundred and 44,000, I know that's been talked about a lot,
Mhm.
but is that just it doesn't mean 144,000?
We believe it doesn't mean
Because
a
that
literal
would be
144,000.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we do. So we think that it's a representation of just it is a
Perfect number
ultra
or
complete
something?
number representing people who have given their lives to Jesus, and who are sealed by His Holy Spirit.
Was it 12 times 12 times 10 times 10 times 10?
Yeah.
Perfect, 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 perfect.
Yes, ma'am.
When Rosemary was talking about the humanism part, he says there will be no rest day or night for those who worship the beast or its image, and that's so true, because if somebody has made, for instance, money their god, they don't rest because they've got to be day
They
and
can't.
night figuring out how am I going to keep this money, how am I going to do this, how am I going to do that,
Yeah.
you know.
There's
so
no rest for
it
people
just
who
goes back to
are
that.
totally focused on themselves. Let me do this real quick, and we may have to rehash this again next week because we're going to run out of time. But anyone who, he proclaims in a loud voice, anyone who, number one, worships the beast, number two, worships his image, and number three, receives his mark on his hand and forehead, will drink the wine of God's fury. Okay? Now, go back again, if you don't mind, to Isaiah chapter 51. I know we were in Jeremiah 51 a minute ago. This is Isaiah 51. So don't get confused. Isaiah 51. Look at verse... most of 51 is talking about how God is going to rescue his people, even though they've been through bad situations. But he says this, beginning in verse 17. Awake, awake, rise up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord, what?
Cup of
The
wrath.
cup of his wrath. You have drained to its dregs the goblet that makes men stagger. And he goes on, of all the sons she bore, there was none to guide her. Of all the sons she reared, there was none to take her by the hand. These double calamities have come upon you. Who can comfort you? Ruin and destruction, famine and sword. Who can console you? So God uses the same imagery back through Isaiah and talking to his people and going, he's already, earlier in Isaiah, going, Babylon's coming to destroy you, right? We've already seen that part. And then there's this message of hope, but in the message of hope is a recognition of why they need to be rescued in the first place. You're going to be destroyed. You're going to be taken captive. You're going to be destroyed. But you're going to be rescued. Why would we have to be rescued? Because we were destroyed. But the way he describes the destruction, God gave them a cup of his wrath. I mean, if you can just imagine, I don't know, just me taking a cup of whatever liquid and just forcing it down Brandon's throat. Like, you're going to drink this, and just choking and gagging on that. That's the kind of imagery that God is using here. You may not have even you don't want this destruction, but I am pouring it on you, and you have consumed it to where you got drunk on it. I'm drunk on destruction. Why? Because I used to be drunk on adultery. I used to be drunk on the things that separated me from God. Does that make sense? Okay? So, again, here in Revelation, we see imagery and the same phrases that God used in talking to people who were rebellious against him hundreds of years ago. Okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same page there. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out was something that Mariette just pointed out was compare verse 11 back in Revelation chapter 14. Compare verse 11 to verse 13. And I know we didn't get that far here, but in verse 11 it says, the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. There is no rest day or night for those who worship the beast in his image, nor anyone who receives the mark of his name. Go down to verse 13. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, as a spirit, they will what? Rest from their labor.
Ooh.
Okay, so there's a distinct difference between the two. What did Jesus say in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28? Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and what will I give you?
Rest.
I give you rest. Okay? there's something to be said for living our lives the way that God wants us to, or coming to Him when we are having problems and temptations and struggles, and for those who follow the beast, for those who walk away from God and are following Satan, are following themselves, there is no rest for them. And when destruction comes, they don't receive the rest that we are going to get to receive because we are devoted to the Lamb. Does that make sense? Okay. There's a couple more things to point out about this, that I'll save till next week, and we'll get. I'm going to make a guarantee. We'll get through the rest of chapter 14 next week. I didn't think it would take us this long, but that's all right. We've had good questions and good discussion today, so we'll talk just a little bit more. I just want to make a quick comment and maybe let Brandon make a quick comment on just the whole the burning sulfur and the smoke and just the torment, and seemingly the angels and the Lamb just watching it happen. Is that what's really going to happen? Is that what heaven looks like? That's what we're going to talk about that next week. Are you shaking your head? No, that's not it.
Can't be.
But that's what he describes. So let's talk about that. Let's start there next week. And we won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but just to kind of clarify some of that, and then we'll move through the rest of chapter 14. And I don't know. We'll see if we get to 15 or not.
Yep.
So okay, thank you guys. Those of y'all online, thank you for listening because you can't see anything. And we'll try to figure that out. We've been having issues with our camera, so we'll try to figure that out
I don't know why.
before next
You
week.
guys are having a
So,
punch out.
I know.
Yeah, both
I
of
am
us kind of
ready.
like at each
I
other.
am
Don't
ready.
even look at me. I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
believe you said that.
Marshall's right.
That's right.
Stop.
Yeah.
That's your body language?
Yeah.
That's right.
Don't you guys feel that hostility every time we walk in here?
Yeah. Thank y'all for being here today.
But you don't, Brandon, because Marshall is the lead minister.
The lead minister. And he doesn't need any of our assistance, but if we want